Pretty good. I haven't paid attention. It's crazy he got, or he opted out, I guess, because I guess now it's sign and trade or he's a free agent. Wouldn't blame him. I'm sure he did everything he could to not go to New York.
Don't worry, guys. I'm back. I had to go to the bathroom. Makes sense. I'm used to hot mics. Everything I say is into a hot mic. What? Not cool, man. Not cool. Really? Love transitioning. And we are live. Welcome to Live Before Lock. I am Josh Engleman. I am joined by Adam Scherer. We are going to break this one down quickly for the next half hour or so before we turn it over to Alex and Kyle. We've got a good one on our hands tonight, Arizona and Seattle. This should be a really fun showdown slate. But let's start it off like this. Adam, how are you?
Pretty good. I'm excited that we're kicking it off at least with a game that should be fun to talk about. It's not like the Vikings and Bears or the Jets and Patriots or anything. We actually have what should be a really, really fun football game, I think.
I cannot wait to watch it. I feel like I haven't watched sports in a while because we don't really have anything on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and it's kind of a bummer. I'm bored during the middle of the week, but I think we should just dive in. So first and foremost, if you're here, please hit the thumbs up, hit that like button, helps us out a ton. Subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell. You guys know what I'm going to tell you now, but why wouldn't you want to subscribe? It's the best thing you can do. You don't want to miss out on our content, and by subscribing, you'll see it faster than you normally would. We got to dive in, and the first question that I'm going to ask you is this. How much DJ Dallas is too much DJ Dallas?
I don't really think there is too much. I mean, obviously the ownership would get to, could in theory get to a point where you don't want to get there. But the thing with him, and I think you and I had talked about it earlier, is even when I was projecting Alex Collins to be active today before we got the news that he wouldn't be, at $600, I was still going to be getting to DJ Dallas just because it would allow me to get to, the quarterbacks that obviously I really want, get to the expensive receivers that I really want. And there was still at least some equity in going to Dallas where, maybe he falls into the end zone on one of his few touches. He caught a couple passes last week, but then you take Alex Collins out of it, and Travis Homer also doubtful or inactive. Not sure what stage we're at right now, but you're down to just having Carlos Hyde coming back from injury, having DJ Dallas, and then having Bo Scarborough up from the practice squad. Assuming Scarborough gets limited work, even if Hyde is the clear-cut one back, which isn't a guarantee, but even if he is, DJ Dallas should get more than enough work to pay off a $600 price tag on its own without even the considerations of what else it allows you to get into your lineups.
So my next follow-up question would be, is he interesting to you in the captain spot? Because obviously $600 at the utility just becomes a no-brainer. His projection is massively north of any other projection in that general area. Does he work as a captain in a GPP?
I think he does if his ownership projection remains where it is right now. We have him projected for about just shy of 2% ownership at captain. In Alex's sim, he has him at 1.4% in the top spot, which I think makes sense. But the one thing you want to keep in mind here too is that we don't really have certainty over the running back workload here. I think the assumption is that Carlos Hyde is the lead back. I think that, that's my assumption. I think that's most people's assumption, but it's not like, Pete Carroll has come out and said, and it's not like you could trust Pete Carroll anyway, that Carlos Hyde's going to carry the ball on 75% of running back carries or something like that. Like if this game with the information that we have available right now were to play out 1,000 different times, there's going to be some times where DJ Dallas just gets a workload that nobody anticipated. So I think that, given the assumptions, he's getting into the top spot in that lineup between 1% and 2% of the time, which is about where his ownership is. But there's still kind of some room, I think, to get to him in tournaments because of that kind of uncertainty around exactly what the running back workload is going to look like.
What do you think you need out of him if he's in the captain spot?
It's not even so much,
I don't know, like 15.
Yeah, I mean that would be nice. It's not even so much what you need out of him either, though, because by putting him in the captain spot, it lets you get some really good lineups as far as just getting the top players from the game into other spots. The one thing that I think gets a little bit weird with him at captain is that the wide receivers, specifically Hopkins, Metcalf, and Lockett, are all so expensive that you still can't really, you can't go like both quarterbacks and then stack the receivers too, just by playing Dallas at captain. So you'll still, even if you play Dallas at captain, if you are jamming in the expensive players, you're going to have one other spot in your lineup that's kind of iffy. So that makes it a little bit more important how Dallas actually does. But, if you get, you said 15, if he catches 4 or 5 passes, happens to score a touchdown, and then whatever yardage comes with that, you're probably in fine shape.
Okay. Had to start with DJ Dallas, and that's more of a DraftKings discussion anyway. Being $600 in the utility spot on DK, a little bit different than being $9,000 in the utility spot on FanDuel. So now that we've got the clear-cut value out of the way, let's just talk about this in a more holistic manner. Just captain or MVP spot, we're going to bounce between the two, whether it's DraftKings or FanDuel. Who are some of your favorite options at the captain spot for today?
So I know you're on the same page, but I think DeAndre Hopkins looks great in the captain spot on DraftKings. You're going to get a lot of ownership, deservedly so, going to both of the quarterbacks. And I think that's fine. There's a lot of slates where we say that we think the quarterbacks are a little bit over-owned in captain. I'm not really sure that's the case here. Maybe to some extent, but I mean, both of these guys run at least a little bit. Murray, obviously, a lot. They both have rushing touchdown equity. So it's not quite the case here, but you're just still going to get so much ownership there. It's naturally going to drive down ownership on DeAndre Hopkins. Then you factor in that by putting Hopkins at captain, you do have to make some difficult decisions on who else is going into that lineup. It's not going to be easy to go like Hopkins captain plus Wilson plus Murray plus run it back with a receiver or something. So you're going to have to make some decisions there. And right now we have him projected for just shy of 10% captain ownership. We have him in the captain spot or in the top spot, and Alex's Sims almost 18% of the time. So I think that is the spot that stands out where he is under-owned, and it's just a matter of, can you make it work with the rest of your lineup?
Yeah, I'm on the same page there. I think Murray and Wilson are the more frequent options in captain, but they're also getting that ownership, north of 20% for both guys, whereas Hopkins is coming in single digits. I mean, technically, if you want to round up, it gets to 10, but I don't want to for my personal example. So I have Hopkins slightly less than Alex. I have him at 18% in his sim. I actually only have it at 15, and that still makes him my favorite captain. So I'd be happy to take Alex's number 2. Anxious to see what Alex's exposures look like when I pull them up in lineup study tomorrow. I'm guessing he's going to be with us on DeAndre Hopkins. Anybody else stand out to you? I think Metcalf is sort of similar, just a little bit behind Hopkins.
Yeah, I think Metcalf and Lockett are both in that range where you're getting the same sort of relatively low ownership because of the quarterbacks taking so much of the ownership. It's a little bit tougher because they obviously cut into each other's workloads a little bit more than you have, for example, Christian Kirk cutting into Hopkins. You also have the dynamic of Tyler Lockett coming into this game with an injury that Pete Carroll has downplayed throughout the week, but Pete Carroll is kind of notorious for lying about everything. So, I saw people talking either on Twitter or in Slack earlier about, are you concerned about Lockett's injury? And I'm concerned as far as I think it adds a layer of uncertainty. I'm not concerned as far as I'm not projecting Tyler Lockett any lower, but that does add at least a little bit more risk to him that you don't really get with Hopkins, on top of the fact that Metcalf and Lockett cut into each other's production so much.
So we touched on the top guys. Have you looked at FanDuel at all?
No. I can pull it.
Okay. So I have my Sims run for FanDuel right now. I could just hit everybody with my top thoughts. This should be no surprise. Since the salary doesn't change on FanDuel compared to DraftKings, where you also spend the extra 1.5 on salary, the top guys are always going to be like the top guys. So Kyler Murray shows up as the optimal MVP for me. 30 to 40% of the time. Ownership is pretty much there with him. A little lighter, oddly enough. So I do still really like Kyler Murray. Russell Wilson, 25%. That's where his ownership is. I think you can get a little bit of leverage on the field on Hopkins or Tyler Lockett, but basically we're talking about the same thing on both sides. I think that in the grand scheme of things, whether it's captain or MVP, there are 5 guys that are really, really good options. And then there's everybody else that's involved in the game that are like 1%ers. Is there anybody that isn't one of the main 5 guys and not the ridiculously priced DJ Dallas that stands out to you as like a captain you have your eye on?
I'm mildly interested in Christian Kirk. Okay. It's not that I think he's a high percentage play. I know Alex has him at 1% in the top spot. His ownership projected to be even less than 1%, but we have seen his workload come up a bit recently. And the main reason I point that out is because his workload at the beginning of the season was lower than we expected. So it's an example of someone I think kind of getting back to where we expected them to be over the Cardinals' last 3 games, 18.8, 30.8, and 18.2% target shares for Christian Kirk. So kind of stepping back into that clear number 2 role for the Cardinals. Whereas, earlier in the season, he was down 13.5, 11.8, 16% target share. So kind of nice to see him trending that direction. And I don't really think it's going to get you a whole lot else in your lineup, which is obviously the problem. Like if you go Kirk at captain on DraftKings, he's 11,100. So it's still going to be not that easy to make a lineup that fills out all 5 flex spots with guys that you love, but it's just such a low owned play for a guy that has a legitimate role as a high ups, a good receiver on an offense that should score a lot of points. Any passing touchdowns that go to Kirk obviously are not going to Hopkins, so you're leveraging against Hopkins there. So I do have some interest in Kirk just because I think he's a nice combination of someone that is in a position to succeed. Like he's the only, when you think about the receivers on these teams that are most likely to have big games, he's the only one not getting any sort of captain ownership.
Yeah, very minimal. He does show up as a positive play as a captain in my data. It's just minimal. You mentioned Alex being around 1%. I'm at 2%. These are not highly likely outcomes. We're talking about, if I were to take my data as absolute gospel, we're talking about Christian Kirk showing up in the captain spot 1 out of every 50 games. So it's not like terribly frequent, but those are the kind of things you're looking for in large field GPPs. When you're in the milli and there's X amount of, I don't even know how big the milli is because I don't get into it. How many people, what are the entries in that? 250,000?
Something thousand, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So if you're in the milli and you're trying to bink with minimal amounts of duplication, Christian Kirk at captain is a direction you might want to go. Otherwise, like he's not a guy you need in 100-person single entry.
Right. Like if I'm playing and I'm just playing cash tonight, I'm not planning on playing tournaments at all. But if I were playing like a 3-max tournament, I don't see any reason I would need Christian Kirk as my captain.
Right. Is there anything else you want to touch on from an MVP level or from the captain spot? Either side of the coin. Anything that stood out to you that you were surprised about? Anybody you think is going over-owned?
Not really. There's a couple guys that if you look at the projected ownership versus Alex's sim are slightly over-owned, but nothing that jumps out like you get sometimes when like Kirk Cousins and Nick Foles are the quarterbacks. There's everyone that's getting any amount of captain ownership, I think it makes sense. Technically, if you look at the sim numbers, Kyler Murray is over-owned, but not to an extent that's worth talking about. I'm not going to tell anyone they shouldn't be playing Kyler Murray at captain.
Yeah, I think Kyler Murray and Russell Wilson are technically speaking over-owned. They're also the 2 most frequently used optimal lineup captains. So it's a little bit different. When you see somebody that's over-owned and they're not all that frequent, that's when I really pay attention and start getting away from people. But just because I think Kyler should be 22% owned instead of 25. Right. That's not a place where I'm just like, well, I need to have 0 now.
Right. It goes back to the conversation where like you're trying to do 2 things with your lineup. 1, get a lineup that has some under-owned pieces, and 2, a lineup that projects really well. Just because there's a player that, projects to be a few points over-owned doesn't mean that that's the spot where you should be looking to do something different.
Exactly. So before we slide over to utility/flex, I got a couple things that I need to touch on. This should be exciting. First and foremost, though, 1,100 people in here, 128 likes. We are off to a fantastic start on Live Before Lock. It's an It's an outstanding new show that we are trying to do. Jordan, I didn't even realize that you have Live Before Lock on the overlay. That makes me so happy. That's really fun. I think we need to stick with LBLBL, which is just so good. So good. Can't wait to see who in the industry steals this one now. Active promo right now. If you guys want to get involved and come to awesemo.com, go to awesemo.com/join. Use the promo code Mayflower. It's where our ancestors came from. $1 NFL Express Pass. Cannot beat it. This is going to be good until November 26th, which I guess is a week from today. Yes. So it's good until Thanksgiving. That makes perfect sense. Use the promo code Mayflower. You can get player projections, ownership projections, Slack, more. It's the NFL Express Weekly Pass. That is where Mayflower will work. If you pick a different package, that code is not going to work. Just going to get out in front of that now. You want to pick NFL Express Pass Weekly, and you can get it for $1 if you use the promo code Mayflower. I assume either Nightbot or Jordan can drop a link in there to sign up a little bit easier. You'll get access to, Showdown slates for if you sign up with this code, you'll get access to all 3 of the Showdown slates for Thanksgiving, along with this Sunday. Now is the perfect time to grab an NFL sub because there's going to be a lot of NFL going on from today all the way up until the Thanksgiving Day games. We also have some free content today. If you want to try and keep an eye on public ownership, lucky for you guys, NFL ownership is free today. So go to awesemo.com, browse to our Showdown or single game ownership, or wait for Nightbot to drop those bad links into our chat. Let's move to utility now. Ooh, this is I love this slate. There's one guy we definitely need to talk. Let's start with FanDuel, because I think people aren't very happy with the amount of FanDuel coverage we give. So I want to give something back to the FanDuel peeps right now, but you got to hit that like button before I do it. Carlos Hyde is $8K. We have him currently projected for about 24% ownership. In my last sim results, he showed up 53% of the time in the optimal flex lineup. What do you think about Carlos Hyde? We'll start on FanDuel and then transition to what your interest level is on DraftKings.
It seems really cheap on FanDuel because, for one, it's not full point PPR, so the wide receivers aren't quite as beneficial there. You're more touchdown hunting, and Hyde obviously has a lot of touchdown equity in this game. So I think that's appealing. And then you compare him to, Kenyon Drake, who's $3,000 more expensive. That's obviously a favorable price point for Hyde. Looking at Edmonds, Chase Edmonds is still $1,500 more than Hyde. So I think it's a really good price point. And, I agree with your sentiment that it seems he's not getting enough ownership based on our projections and the Sims.
I'm going to be loading up on Carlos Hyde in that regard, much like DJ Dallas on DraftKings. Does Carlos Hyde stand out to you at 5,200 as a utility play on DK?
Seems pretty neutral to me. And the main reason I say that is because of roster construction, I think. And it's something else that I know you and I talked about some before the show, but he's at a price point where in and of itself, $5,200 it's not tough to get to, and it's not a price that I think is too expensive for Hyde. The problem that you kind of run into is that in a lot of builds, at least, it'll force you into sort of a dead spot elsewhere in your lineup where you have like 8K left over, which is not enough to get to Tyler Lockett or DK Metcalf, but it's more than you're going to pay for a kicker or something. And so you end up in a lot of situations, I think, kind of dropping Carlos Hyde to a clearly worse play, but enable to enable yourself to move up somewhere. So from a roster construction standpoint, I think he's a little bit tougher to get to than I first thought he would be. That being said, if you have a lineup where you like all 5 other guys, I think $5,200 for Carlos Hyde is a perfectly fair price because, there's concerns, or there's at least uncertainty, I won't say concerns, over what his exact role will be coming back from the injury. But you don't have Carson, you don't have Homer, you don't have Collins. It's basically him and DJ Dallas, with maybe Bo Scarborough mixed in a little bit. So there's only so many ways that he can not be on the field.
So I am a little bit heavier on Hyde than you are right now. Showed up in the Sims 35% of the time. We've got ownership around 27%. I did run a crunch. I'm not like you. I'm playing a lot more cash right now, but I am playing some 20 max. I'm quite a bit over the field on Carlos Hyde, and I have all of the DJ Dallas, just cornering the market on Seahawks running backs for tonight, it looks like. So I'm happy to get to Hyde. I do agree, though, that he is sort of in a salary dead zone. I'm way less interested in the guys that are sort of bookending him. Drake, Edmonds, David Moore, Fitzgerald. Those guys are all quite a bit lower than Hyde. Hyde is just sticking out as like the play in that range. And that's what's I think everything that could be around that salary tier is just pushing him straight to the top.
Yeah, and that's kind of the other side of the point I was making too. He's in a dead zone himself, so you will typically get to those players kind of easily because like there's nobody else around them to pull you away. So it kind of comes down to like, do you have 5 guys in your lineup and you're down to $5,500 and you can put Hyde in, or are there 4 guys left and you're trying to make Hyde one of them? Then you kind of end up in a situation where you end up getting away from him because it's a weird build.
How do you feel about Kyler Murray in the utility spot? 13,000, or in the utility spot or flex spot on FanDuel, $17K. That feels like a lot of money to spend on someone where you're not getting a multiplier.
I still think it's fine. He's just such a high scoring player. And I mean, we talk a lot about the floor that rushing upside gives you at quarterback, but it gives you a monster ceiling too when you're talking about not someone who is going to get you 30 or 40 rushing yards, but someone who has the potential to run for over 100 yards and has like 50% rushing touchdown equity for the Cardinals. So it's, he's just different than most quarterbacks, even the ones that run. So the upside for him is still just so high. Plus, and I know you talked about it a little bit on Twitter, but we both talked about Hopkins being a really good captain play from an ownership perspective. He's going to positively correlate with Kyler Murray if you can find a way to get them both into that lineup, and having the Hopkins at captain, Murray at flex version of that is going to be a lot lower owned than vice versa.
Yeah, I like it a lot more on DraftKings. I don't like Kyler Murray all that much on FanDuel. I think it's sort of a problematic play to pay $17K for Kyler Murray and have no boost whatsoever to his projection from that when there is no additional salary to the MVP spot. I think it's really difficult to have a good MVP and still pay up for Kyler Murray and assume that the fantasy points that he puts up are efficient enough at $17K. So I think it's a little bit of a problem to go all the way up to Murray. His ownership is significantly higher than how he showed up in my sims. So I don't mind getting away from Kyler Murray in the flex spot on FanDuel. I would much rather go to more Kyler shares in the MVP spot.
So I'm assuming you're off both quarterbacks in the flex spot on FanDuel?
A little bit less so to Russell Wilson just because he picks up the extra $500, but I would be lighter than the public for both.
Okay.
And more likely to have an aggressive amount of them in the MVP spot.
Sure.
Anybody else stand out to you at the utility on DraftKings? Just some of the guys that I see that look good enough to me. I still like Hopkins, but I would rather have him in the captain spot. I do think, how are you handling DK Metcalf? Because that right there is a guy that doesn't appear to be projecting very well for me in utility, mostly because his projected captain ownership is so low that I think that I would just rather get more shares there.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because we actually have identical ownership projected between him and Tyler Lockett at utility. If ownership's equal, I prefer Lockett. For one, he's a little bit cheaper. For two, there's at least some chance that you see a heavier target game for Lockett again, like you did the last time these two teams played. You had Arizona shadowing Metcalf, and you had Tyler Lockett get like 20 targets. Not saying that's going to happen again, but it's still something that clearly could, since it happened last time. And if you're going to get identical ownership there, I think that I like Lockett a little bit more. So if we get a final in the final ownership update, if Metcalf's ownership comes down and Lockett's goes up, I'll be more interested in Metcalf. But as it is right now, I have a little bit more interest in Lockett between the two.
Okay. Let's get into some really weird stuff. Where do you stand on kickers and defense for tonight? This feels like a little bit different than it did on Monday, where I think it was pretty clear that defenses were at least in play because of the low game total, 56.5 here, maybe a bit less so. Or do they end up being more appealing because you expect more offense, more chances at a potential pick six?
I think that we're back to normal now, where I very rarely roster defenses, and I don't roster kickers very much either. We had a nice stretch of games where defenses were in play, especially last time when they were also inexpensive. But yeah, now it's just back to it's since you don't have to roster them, it just makes such a big difference. Like we talk about on main slates, that it's actually a decent strategy in tournaments to chase defenses like this when they're facing an offense that's going to throw a lot, because it gives them that pick six upside, like you said. But in this format, you don't have to roster a defense at all. So you're comparing them to running backs and wide receivers, and you have a better chance of getting Andy Isabella housing an 80-yard touchdown than you do of, the defense scoring 20 something points. So,
Right.
When you start comparing them across like that, they're just not going to come out as very good plays.
Yeah, defense is not something that I'm looking at today. I don't generally look at them. I do have a random share of the Seahawks defense, but don't use that as any sort of goal. I do like Jason Myers, though, today. I think he is showing up a little bit under owned, so I have some exposure in GPPs to Myers. There are some cash lineup builds that had Myers popping up as well. Are you more likely to get to kickers today because of the high total?
Not really. I still question the upside there. And like the thing is too, normally for a kicker to have like a game that you actually really want, the game ends up being pretty low scoring, which this game can be, of course. But then you get into the weird stuff like, what's the rest of your lineup look like? Because if you're allocating the amount of money that I think most people will to quarterbacks and wide receivers in this game, and it's a game where a kicker is one of the highest scoring guys on the slate, you probably have some issues elsewhere in your lineup. So I'm not that interested in them. It's kind of similar to the defenses where, like, if you have to roster a kicker, then you would love to roster a kicker from a game like this. But since I don't have to roster a kicker, I would rather take a shot on a guy who might only get a couple of targets, but that has the ability to just on one target score 15 points, than roster a guy who has to kick like 4 or 5 field goals to get there.
Let's ignore the kickers. Let's ignore the defenses. And if you're playing on FanDuel, congratulations, you can just ignore the defenses. By default, they are not a part of the slate. What do you like for value? What are some of the off the beaten path type guys, the lower salary guys that you have your eye on for today?
A little bit more ownership going to a couple of these guys than I was hoping, it looks like. But, I mentioned Isabella at 2K. I thought maybe he'd go a little bit under the radar just because he's not the minimum. He's someone that, is probably going to get somewhere between 1 and 3 targets, but he has home run speed and can, just take one to the house. But beyond that, you also have had Jacob Hollister more involved for Seattle at the tight end position, but he's getting 13% ownership. So it's not like he's really sneaky. Same can go for Will Disley, who hasn't been getting more work, but still should get a couple of targets. But amongst the cheap guys, there's not any one guy that is standing out as really under the radar for me. I think that the guys that I thought would be under the radar really aren't.
Yeah, we're sort of in the same page. Like, I assumed that something would stand out. And I was like, I guess I like Andy Isabella. Well, he's already 15% owned. So, I don't like him all that much more. How is there an ownership level that DJ Dallas could get to where you would suddenly change your thought process? Because I don't know if I have one.
I don't think there really is one, because in part because of how the rest of this slate is. It would be different if this were the Ravens-Patriots game where for example, I liked Devin Duvernay, but I didn't like anything that I was going to be able to get to because I rostered Devin Duvernay. Exact opposite here. Like, going to these cheap guys just opens up a ton of guys that you can roster at the top that you're going to be happy with. So saving the money has a lot of value on this slate. And when you compare DJ Dallas's chance of success to similarly priced guys like Jacob Hollister or, Darnell Daniels, who probably won't even get a target, Max Williams, like guys like that, it's just such a big difference that I really don't know. Like, I'd have to start. You're thinking about it more in terms of what's his ownership have to get to for me to build my lineup completely differently.
Yeah.
But on this slate, I don't really want to do that. Like, then I'm not rostering Kyler Murray and Russ Wilson. And, then I'm going like the kickers route where it's like, I hope this is a much lower scoring game than people thought. So, I mean, the answer is just really high. It's not one of those slates where I'm looking at anyone similarly priced to Dallas and saying like, I think Dallas, loses here 33% of the time or something.
So I got 2 things I want to touch on yet, and then we're going to get out of here. So we have just shy of 10 minutes left before we turn it over to the boss man, Alex Baker and Kyle, where they'll take you guys all the way up to lock. This is live before lock. They will be live before lock, just so everybody understands that. But we're doing a bit of a giveaway, which is exciting. Head to Awesemo.com's Twitter account. That would be Awesemo_com, because you can't do dots. At least I don't think you can. And by dots, I mean periods. I don't know why I'm calling them dots. Why do we call it a dot in the URL? Why do we call it Awesemo.com and not Awesemo.com?
Easier to say. I don't know.
I guess. You never let anybody call it a dot. You'd be like, it's not a dot, it's a period, moron. It's not important. Go to twitter.com/Awesemo_com. Go check out our pinned tweet. We are doing a $250 giveaway. All you have to do is this. Reply to the tweet with the answer to this question. Will Kyler Murray or Russell Wilson have more passing yards tonight? Reply to the tweet, follow Awesemo_com, follow @AwesemoNFL, and all you have to do is like that tweet then too. As long as your reply is in by 8:20, you have an opportunity to win randomly $250. Free. It's free $250. Why wouldn't you want to take a shot at a free $250? You're willing to play DFS? This one doesn't cost. This is a free roll. This is a free roll for 250 bones. All you have to do is follow us on Twitter. You cannot beat it. So go to twitter.com/Awesemo_com. See, I said dot there. It's fun. You want to talk a little bit of cash before we get out of here?
Sure.
High level stuff. If you had to say these guys should just be in cash on DraftKings, how many guys do you see immediately that you would be surprised to see outside of a standard optimal?
At least 3. So it's 3 with Murray, Wilson, and Dallas. And then it comes down to what can you do with the wide receivers.
Okay, we are on the same page there. It's some combination of Murray, Wilson, Dallas for sure. At least 1 and probably 2, but it depends what you're doing at captain. If it's DJ Dallas at captain, then you're probably doing 2 of the 3 wideouts. If it's not DJ Dallas at captain, you're probably doing 1 of the 3 wideouts.
Right.
Seems about right.
Yeah, I think if it's not DJ Dallas, you're probably doing 1 of the wideouts and Carlos Hyde. If it is DJ Dallas, then maybe you can get 2 of the wideouts and then punt instead of Carlos Hyde.
Okay. On FanDuel, just judging from what I'm looking at right now, I don't have any FanDuel cash in play, but it seems like Carlos Hyde is a guaranteed cash option at the 8K mark, given what I'm seeing. I assume you're trying to get to 1 of Kyler Murray or Russell Wilson at the MVP spot. I assume that would be Kyler. I don't have much else as a lean there, but Carlos Hyde for sure looks like a cash game staple for FanDuel.
Yep, agreed with that. Obviously, haven't built a lineup there, but just from looking at the pricing, I agree with that.
Couple more minutes before we get out of here. So I think that since most people don't normally get this opportunity, let's open it up to questions. YouTube chat. There are 1,500 plus of you, 250 likes. Hit that like button. Get your questions in. Premium Slack. Get your questions in. Adam and I will take questions for the next 4 minutes. And at 7:15, we are going to get out of here. Transition to Live Before Lock with Adam and Kyle. Not Adam and Kyle. Alex and Kyle. Now I feel like Laffy. Oh. The amount of times that I listened to a show and heard Laffy call you Alex and him Adam, countless. And now I'm doing it. The worst. Legalize wants to know if we'll review his lineup. You want to do that?
Sure.
Legalize, post that. I was going to go to 7:15. They start at 7:20 now. Jordan, you tell me how long you want me to go, and I'll go, man. I could do this all night. Adam and I can go to late 20, man. This be easy. Okay. What is Hyde's captain ownership on FanDuel? That's a question that just came in, and I will give that good. But you can go to Awesemo.com and check our ownership. They are free today. All right, legalized lineup. You ready?
Sure. Yeah, let's go.
Hopkins captain. Murray, Lockett, Edmonds, Moore, DJ Dallas.
Murray, Lockett, Edmonds, Moore, DJ Dallas.
I don't think I'm a fan.
I didn't hear anything I didn't like.
I did.
I mean, I'm using the word like loosely on David Moore, but he's fine.
Yeah, I'm loading it into my sheet right now, legalized. So let's see how that looks. But on the surface, I don't like it.
Yeah, I mean, like I don't see anything. I don't see anything wrong with it. Like, it's not a lineup that I look at it and I'm just like, yeah, I would love to play this and stuff. But also, it's Showdown, and typically the lineups that you immediately look at and say I would love to play this and stuff are going to be really popular. So, like there's no like glaring errors for me. You have Hopkins at captain, which is nice from an ownership standpoint. You have him with Murray, which correlates. You have the Arizona running back that's involved in the passing game, so he's not really working against Kyler Murray. And then you have, two receivers and a running back from Seattle, which is fine.
So I like it a lot more in my spreadsheet than I did off the top of my head. Ranks top 200 in fantasy points. I think it's a positive value lineup. It's not ultra chalky, and it's more likely to be an optimal than it is based on the ownership. So depending on what contests you're getting in, I like it. But that is very dependent. If it's a smaller field, I think it's probably a bit too far off of the main path, but it's not ultra contrarian. Better than I thought at first. Legalized better than I thought it was.
I mean, if it's a small field, literally like all you have to do is make David Moore be Carlos Hyde.
Yeah. Let me see how that changes it. Okay. If you make David Moore into Carlos Hyde, it turns into my 4th ranked lineup.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a really sound like base of a lineup, I think.
Yeah. I don't think he's in like ultra large field stuff. That was part of my thought process out of the gate. It just seemed like with Moore and Edmonds, it felt like 2 guys that I felt were a little bit further away.
Well, yeah, and just looking at that's kind of what made me think about Hyde was he has 2 pivots off of the quote unquote best play in that price range, which in large field stuff is perfect, especially when you're not doing anything like there's nothing in the lineup that negatively correlates with each other. You're just basically saying, okay, what if Carlos Hyde is the backup running back and everyone overpays for him at 5,200? Then this lineup is good as long as David Moore catches a couple passes.
I do like that. I like it. Legalize. Alex needs a minute or two, so we'll stick around for a minute or two. Legalize. I hope you print some money. If you do, you just gotta buy Adam and I a beer. Let's see. Answer the questions, please, guys, or I'm gonna switch channels. There are 1,600 people here, man. I couldn't answer all these questions that quickly if I wanted to. Dub K, no, not today. Let's see. Questions. Hyde at captain or Kirk at captain in a GPP?
I mean, a lot will depend on the rest of your lineup, I think. But I personally like the idea of Kirk.
Same. I agree with you there. At captain specifically, I think Kirk is getting underrepresented and Hyde is probably getting overrepresented.
And also not that it's a big deal at all based on their pricing and the fact that it's a 1-game slate, but there is negative correlation between Hyde and Dallas. And so like if you're playing Hyde at captain, you're hoping kind of to get that game where Hyde plays more than we're expecting, in which case Dallas is playing less than we're expecting, which again, I don't think is a huge deal on a 1-game slate, especially when one of these guys is $600. But when you're just asking between 2 players, it does give a slight lean to Kirk for me.
Let's see what else we have. Biggest fade is Kyler Murray.
That does not sound
kind
like a
of
fun night.
like I get it, but yeah, that's going to be a really non-desirable night for you.
The thing about fading Murray too is thinking about what type of player he is, like thinking about all the rushing that he typically is going to give you. So if you fade Murray, you have all this money, right? And that money's probably, at least to some extent, going to like DeAndre Hopkins, maybe Christian Kirk. If you kind of take it as a given that Kyler Murray is getting points from running, if those receivers start piling up touchdowns, you just got a good game from Kyler Murray pretty easily.
Yeah, I don't love it all that much on DraftKings, but I think you can get there on FanDuel just because of the way the lineups are constructed. Any Dan Arnold thoughts?
Not really. I mean, he's hopefully, if you play him, going to get a couple of targets. They're most likely to come in the red zone if he gets them. But it's not like he's not one of these tight ends that is like a real goal line option, because Kyler Murray just takes care of so much of their touchdowns. And then you also have, obviously Hopkins in there. So he's not anything that I'm excited about.
Being told that Lockett is the biggest fade. Not so sure I agree.
If I just have to like pick a player and say I'm not going to play him, I would pick Lockett before I picked Murray.
I would pick Metcalf.
Sure. Yeah. Okay.
No part of that would be fun.
Yeah.
Because he's just as likely to go for 18 for 900 yards and 27 touchdowns because the dude is a freak.
Yeah. I'm not actively looking not to roster any of the best players in this game. But if you just had to tell me to choose between Lockett and Murray, who are the two people that have been thrown out so far, I would rather not have Lockett.
Jordan, how are we looking? Good to go? Well, then I'm going to sign us out of here with 1,700 people in here and 300 plus likes. You guys did fantastic. Please hit that thumbs up one last time so we can't give the credit to Alex and Kyle. Adam and I are going to be doing these for Mondays and Thursdays for Showdown slates, so get ready. We're doing live before lock twice a week now moving forward. Adam, final thoughts before we get out of here.
Good luck.
I wasn't ready for that shit.
I wasn't ready, everybody. I thought you knew better than to ask me.
Good luck, everybody. We'll talk to you guys next Monday. Stay here. No, don't go anywhere. Same stream. Later, man.
You go.
All right.
Jordan, you brought the music.
Yo, what's up, guys? Welcome to Live After, Live Before Lock, presented to you by Awesemo.com. Got a great Thursday night football game, Seahawks, Arizona, and joined today by Kyle Dvorchak. Kyle, how you doing, man?
Not bad, not bad. I love it. The Live After, Live Before Lock. Is that LALBLBL?
We have to get creative, just, so we have a unique name these days.
Yeah, you got to get that for SEO. Like if you're just doing the, DFS strategy, you're not going to show up on the first page of Google. But if you get LALBLBL, no one else is Googling LALBLBL except for our folks.
I think you might be right. So tonight, sponsored by No House Advantage, a great place to play DFS style contests with prop betting. So we'll talk about them. We got a really exciting Thursday night game. It's funny. I'm used to talking Jets and Patriots and whatever teams with you. But tonight, Cardinals, Seahawks, two of the most popular and best fantasy teams. The defenses, on the other hand, for these teams, not so hot. We'll get into that. Seattle has been on record pace for bad defense. So this should be a game with a lot of offense, I'd say. Let's talk just briefly on the last Showdown slates. The last one, Monday, we had the Bears-Vikings. That one didn't go exactly according to plan because Nick Foles just absolutely did terrible. What did you learn on Monday?
Yeah, not only did Nick Foles do terrible, but Dalvin Cook, I mean, he's sort of got there. I believe he had over 100 yards from scrimmage, but he didn't score. I believe he didn't hit the 100-yard bonus, which is, crucially important, the difference between 90. I believe he got 90 yards because I know he had 30 carries, and I believe he ran at 3.2 per carry, so that put him at, 96 or whatever. Didn't get the 100-yard bonus, and there's a crucial difference between 96 and 100. So not only did Nick Foles not get there, kind of one of the obvious passing plays because of the pace his team plays or throws at specifically, neither Dalvin Cook got there as well. So very interesting slate. I feel like the early part of the season, we had a lot of the more obvious plays hit. It was simply the best plays were doing well. And maybe that's a testament to not understanding pricing in the beginning of the season, whereas, week 2, did we know Kyler Murray was going to dominate? maybe not. And maybe the people who saw that could have benefited. Now the pricing seems a bit more sharp. Someone like Nick Foles maybe gets priced into a range where you actually have to consider it. The same with Dalvin Cook, where you really had to consider at his price, am I actually playing him, knowing that any player, Kyler Murray or David Moore on this slate, any player has a chance of busting, some more than others. Obviously with David Moore, who knows what he does? Kyler Murray, probably going to hit. I think that was the same case with Dalvin Cook, where probably going to hit, but probably doesn't always hit. And that is why we play tournaments, is that probably doesn't always hit. And it's about figuring out, does the field correctly judge that? And we have another perfect example of that tonight with like all players. So many players seem like they should always be hitting. And it's our job to decide if their odds of hitting are like commensurate with the field's projection of them hitting.
Definitely. Tonight's slate, a lot different, change of pace here. So some days it's a struggle to find 6 guys you like. Tonight it's a struggle to narrow it down to 6. So a lot of fun tonight. Guys, if you can hit the thumbs up button, I might have to bully you a little bit because Josh Engleman, he did a great job before us getting those likes, and there's only a few left. So hit that thumbs up. All right. We also have a special promo going. If you're not a member already, the Express NFL Pass gets you all the Showdown content, projections, ownership projections, and our top Showdown plays, simulations. So you can actually get that for $1 instead of $3.95 tonight with the promo code Mayflower. I mean, basically giving it away here for $1. So make sure to use that code. It's valid through Thanksgiving. So we got the Cardinals tonight. I mean, it's hard to shake that last play of the game on Sunday where Kyler Murray threw a touchdown to Hopkins in the last seconds of the game. Some of you guys probably lost a lot of money. Some of you guys probably won a ton of money. I was in the first category there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So,
yep.
I mean, when one of us loses, the others win. That's how it works. But It wasn't anything we didn't expect because we know those guys are crazy good. But it's hard to think that one play won't change the slate tonight, just people's expectations going into this game. So do you think there'll be any carryover just based on the fact that Arizona crushed on Sunday and Seattle had an off day?
Yeah, I mean, I think that would give like a marginal lean towards like the Cardinals. Obviously, the fact that they ended up coming through in like a very vivid sense. It's not that they just slowly grind it out. Like I do think there's literally a human aspect of the vividness bias where like the things that stick out in our head are the things that we draw most like quickly on, the things that we draw most aptly on. So do I think there is maybe, I don't know, it's hard to even quantify it, but sure, a 0.1, 0.2, maybe even up to like 1% chance that people are more excited to play a Kyler Murray than a Russell Wilson. Yeah, I would say so. I think it'd be hard to not shake the human nature of the most recent things we saw being the most available in our brain and affecting us when we make our decisions. Do I think it makes a huge difference? No. I think maybe in 2016 or 17, when DFS was a little less evolved, the last game would have more impact on the ownership of the like N+1 game. Yeah, at this point, I think it's less likely that that's the case. So I wouldn't be weighing it too much. And in terms of how like I personally weigh my own projections, it doesn't really make much of a big difference to me. It was an awesome play, an awesome game, and a game that definitely cost me some money because I think we were both in the same boat. That just, a lot of ownership on that game. Let's try and fade it. And it worked for a while. And I'm not like, congrats to the people who didn't fade it. I'm not disappointed that it didn't hit because like, I'm not surprised. 2 awesome quarterbacks facing off. Anything can happen in the last 5 minutes. I'm not like, oh, I got cheated out of that. If it happens, it happens. I don't mind that I didn't play it, but props to the people who did. Do I think it changes my calculus on this game? Not really. It's just one play. It's an awesome play, but it's just one play.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, we knew Kyler Murray was having the best fantasy season of anyone this year. Russell Wilson close behind. I do think Hopkins was slumping a little bit, so maybe people's impression of him will be higher, and I don't think he'll be under the radar at all. I mean, Showdown, so it probably would have been unrealistic anyway, but that was a great play. It's hard to shake that one play when we're looking at lineups today, especially given that Seattle's defense has been so bad. But let's talk about some of the guys on Arizona that haven't been as profitable this year, I guess you could say. Number 1, Kenyon Drake, going into the season, everyone saw the last games of 2019 and they're like, this guy's going to be a total workhorse back. He kind of has been getting 16 rushing attempts per game, I think. And it just hasn't turned into much because they're very low value carries. But the volume is there. So this is the kind of player that drives everyone nuts in fantasy, where on paper it looks like the volume's great, but the results haven't been there. Any love for Drake tonight?
Yeah, I don't think he's a bad play because it's exactly like you said. The volume is there. And at the end of the day, I think that's what we should almost always be chasing. There are some caveats. Like there are players who are going to be less efficient on the same volume as other players because of external factors, even because of their talent, which is hard to discern. But I think given the right sample, the right context, you can discern in some sense that like Logan Thomas, even if you give four targets to Logan Thomas and 4 targets to Travis Kelce, I will bet that one of them will be more efficient. But when you're looking at players who do I know if Kenyon Drake is incredibly talented or completely dust? I have no clue. So I'm going to rely, I'm going to fall back on the volume factor. And like you said, the volume has been there, 16 carries per game, multiple games over at least at 100 yards, which is really what we're looking for. And when you look at his game logs, starting the season, 16, 20, 18, 13, 18, 20, 14, 16, a lot of high numbers in terms of rushing there. And because he doesn't give you much as a pass catcher, almost gives you nothing as a pass catcher, interesting leverage off of the very obvious Kyler Murray, DeAndre Hopkins, and even on Showdown, Christian Kirk is going to be obvious as well. So interesting leverage, getting a ton of work, and he's dominating the red zone work in terms of him versus Edmonds on the season. So he's interesting. Do I think he can absolutely go out and disappoint you with 20 carries for 60 yards? Sure, but I rely on the volume. Unless I can be incredibly confident that certain players are going to be less efficient, I think the way Larry Fitzgerald is used is less efficient on a per target basis than Andy Isabella. But given outside of these very obvious, I cherry pick these stats because I know that I can be more confident in those. I don't have any reason to believe Kenyon Drake is any worse or any better than a league average back. He's getting above league average volume, so I like him.
Yeah, I think Drake is an interesting bounce back play. Given that kind of workload, and also makes a great play in a game script lineup where you expect Arizona to dominate. Those tend to be pretty good lineups where maybe you stack up 5 players from one team, even if the Vegas lines don't suggest that's a likely outcome. It's usually likely enough that you can make good money doing that. I did skip over the inactive, so let's address those real quick. Chris Carson is out tonight. That was expected. Homer had been doubtful. He is out. That means DJ Dallas will be the third down back tonight for Seahawks, most likely. On the Cardinals side, we have Darrell Daniels out. He was questionable. Max Williams was questionable. He's in. Not anything that's going to move the needle. I mean, Arizona doesn't really pass the tight ends very often, but some deep flyers there. All right, so we know Hopkins is getting far and away the top number of targets on the team. He's gotten 88 so far this season. The next highest is Fitz with 47. So how confident do you feel in guys like Fitzgerald, Kirk, or maybe even going down the depth chart to Isabella?
I mean, I don't feel incredibly confident, but it's all about what I think the field thinks is what is their confidence level. And I don't think we're seeing maybe the requisite ownership on some of the big, maybe any of these guys. But in my mind, I tend to gravitate towards the big playmakers, your Christian Kirks and your Andy Isabellas, although Andy Isabella doesn't get a ton of targets. Although in the same sense, if maybe not a playmaker, but if for some reason, and it's absolutely possible, Larry Fitzgerald goes out and gets 6 targets, 60 yards and a touchdown, he falls in the same basket. So I think all of the ancillary pass catchers, and I think that is probably true on a lot of showdown slates where people just gravitate towards the top options and kind of miss out on the middle guys. I don't have faith in any one specific guy. Christian Kirk, I believe he missed one game. I think it was week 3, is actually 1 target, I believe, behind Larry Fitzgerald, but his ADOT being way higher than Larry Fitzgerald's, I think 5.8, gives him a lot more air yards, a lot more upside. Christian Kirk would be my favorite, although I don't think any of these guys are guys to shy away from, just because one, given the fact that I am trying to get up to your Kyler Murrays, your Russell Wilsons, et cetera, I need to find some guys who I can actually afford to play. For me, I think any of the Arizona receivers specifically are probably my favorite targets in terms of just how do I find some mid-price guys to get the salary, to get up to multiple of the expensive guys. For me, it's Christian Kirk, but I will field arguments for any of Christian Kirk, Larry Fitzgerald, and Andy Isabella. I think the question really comes down to Christian Kirk being the obvious play. Do you go with the more high volatility play of Andy Isabella, or do you lock in clearly the number 3 receiver in Larry Fitzgerald, but probably arguably a lesser ceiling, at least on a per target basis for sure?
Well, I think you mentioned it's all about the public's perception of players and how that relates to the ownership. And my general lean is that Larry Fitzgerald is a very unpopular player at this stage in his career.
People do not like him anymore.
Yeah, he's only averaging 9 yards per catch. Andy Isabella is averaging 16. So, I mean, there's like a huge difference in how these guys are used. And then when we go to the routes run, I mean, we see that Fitzgerald was on the field for 95% of dropbacks last week. Isabella only 22%. So the public is way higher on Isabella than the Cardinals are. And that's enough for me to maybe hold off on the Isabella. So what about any deep flyers, tight ends, or?
I mean, with Darrell Daniels out, I think in like the Millie Maker, you could arguably go to a Dan Arnold. But like you said, they haven't targeted their tight ends. And I would argue it's probably because they have good pass catching running backs. They have maybe the most target dominant receiver in the league in DeAndre Hopkins, in good backup or, number 2 and number 3 receivers in Christian Kirk and Larry Fitzgerald. So I don't know, maybe on a different team, Dan Arnold would have done something. But without Darrell Daniels, I guess it's arguable that you could play him. He's in the player pool. He went from maybe not in the player pool to in the player pool in the Millie Maker, but the deep flyers aren't great. Like Keyshawn Johnson doesn't see hardly any work. I don't even know. He might have not been active tonight, actually. So I don't think maybe he wasn't, but they just don't use it.
He's inactive.
I was going to say they don't I don't think even brought Keyshawn Johnson. So that fact, like, I don't know, Andy Isabella, an okay number 4, but honestly, as far as number 4 receivers go, kind of like you said, people seem to like, and I like Andy Isabella as a talent, but the Cardinals don't. So I don't know. Dan Arnold would honestly be the deepest I would go in this offense. I can't really think of anyone outside of him. I think maybe the way you find leverage on this slate, as opposed to saying like, I'm going to play this weird one-off, 1.2K player, is playing different players at captain.
I like it. Yeah, I mean, especially with a good DJ Dallas value, it might be hard to get to some of the more long shot plays tonight. So maybe Millie Maker only. No House Advantage, our sponsor. I know a lot of you guys out there like prop betting. The things we do for fantasy often translate very directly to props. And No House Advantage combines the two with prop style contests for DFS. So in a lot of states, you might not even be able to play against the book, or maybe you're like me and you get limited at all the books. So the No House Advantage, you're just playing against Joe Schmoes. It's a lot easier to win. I know a lot of guys have been winning, and we have projections on the site for No House Advantage for free. You get 20 free bucks with the promo code Awesemo. And $20, go out and buy a 6-pack or 2. Have a good night. What props are you liking tonight? First one on No House Advantage.
I mean, so as always, I don't want to belabor the point, because if you've tuned in to any live before locks on Showdown, you'll know that for the most part, interceptions, No House Advantage, I think almost blanket. I know we've had I think Brett Ripien's was 1.5. Outside of the most outlier situations, most interceptions props are set at a half, and we almost always like the overs. So in this case, Kyler Murray and Russell Wilson, we like the overs on both interceptions. So I'll try and mix it up a little bit. Tyler Lockett, the line is set at 5.5 receptions. Our projection is slightly over 7. Our projection is slightly over 7. Our median projection is at about 6.8. And it's simply that when you play on an offense that now Seattle actually playing like a modern NFL offense, and Tyler Lockett still leading the team with, I believe, a target share that's 2% greater than DK Metcalf. It's a lot of targets from one of the most efficient quarterbacks in the league. So outside of the obvious interception ones, I will give you the over on the Tyler Lockett receptions line at No House Advantage specifically.
Nice. Yeah, I think those are the safest bets on No House Advantage, the overs on interceptions. I'll go with Greg Olsen over receiving yards. Line is 20.5. Now he's gotten pretty good playing time. Last week they barely used Disley and Hollister. Greg Olsen ran routes on 2/3 of plays, so I think maybe there's some value there. What about the sports books? Do you see any props you're betting tonight?
So I went over to OddsShopper and I was like, well, where's the best line on Kenyon Drake? And honestly, obviously it literally matters in the way you generate EV, but in terms of the lines that are set, they're all under 50. It's 47.5 across the board, except for William Hill, which has them at 49.5 at plus 100. I would say probably 49.5 plus 100 just off instinct is maybe better EV than 47.5 at minus 118 on DraftKings Sportsbook. But like regardless, whatever sportsbook you use, I would lean towards the William Hill. But if you have access to DraftKings Sportsbook and that's what you're using, go for it, because our line on Kenyon Drake is over 70 rushing yards, or at least our projection on Kenyon Drake is over 70 rushing yards. And simply that, like we talked about like at the beginning of the show, guys who get volume tend to produce. And even like I think running back more than any other position is so much a cog in the machine where they just get like the down and distance and like the offensive line blocking in the scheme all predict what they do much better than just looking at like the running back's history of yards per carry or whatever you want to look at. So if we're going to see 16, 17 carries from a Kenyon Drake, I mean, I'm slamming the line. I think the minus, what did I say, plus 100 at William Hill at 49.5 is like instinctively, I haven't done the numbers, but instinctively I would say that plus 100 is worth going up the extra 2 yards. But if you're playing on, DK Sportsbook, we're still taking the overs. We have the overs at like all the books essentially.
Yeah, I like it. What I'm looking at here on that props tool is Max Williams under 8.5 yards. I mean, I just love picking these random dudes that they're putting props up on. And this one's more for the sweat than the EV, I'd say. I have him for 1.2 targets. So there's a good chance he doesn't even get a target. And then his efficiency has been pretty good. 68% catches, 12 yards per catch. It'll be a fun sweat because at any time, you could lose this one. You gotta wait it all out to get the W.
That reminds me, I had based on our lines, I had Chris Herndon a few weeks ago under his receiving prop, and it was just like, does he catch his one pass? And I don't think he got targeted, and it felt great. It is a great sweat to go for one target.
Yeah, if you're a glutton for a sweat like me, then that Max Williams under could be a good one. All right, let's talk about the Seahawks. Getting a lot of questions about the running backs tonight. Carson being out. And then we also have Homer out. Those are two guys that played a lot of snaps this year. Alex Collins, he had been the lead back last game, but he is on the practice squad now because he played his 2 maximum games. If they wanted to play him more, they'd have to pay him more. He's getting paid $80K now. They have to pay $800K. So that it sounds like a small amount in the context of NFL. So I'm not sure why they didn't do that, but they brought up Bo Scarborough. Bo Scarborough totally tilted me last year because everyone was on Ty Johnson this one day because the Lions, all the running backs were out. They're like, Ty Johnson's going to be the workhorse. And I mean, I might have actually said that. I'm quoting myself. But the day of, they signed Bo Scarborough, and he was their workhorse back. And he's more of a rusher, not a great pass catcher, I believe.
That's from what I know about Bo Scarborough. He was like Derrick Henry light, I believe, at Alabama as well. And he does fit into that mold of like Alex Collins, these like between the tackles bangers. And it's his style of back, I think, is just like doing a poor imitation of Derrick Henry, probably honestly doing a poor imitation of Alex Collins.
Definitely, yeah. And I mean, the main factor here is Carlos Hyde is back. He is also that type of player. Now, Carlos Hyde, he is one of the worst receiving backs in the NFL. He's averaged less than 6 yards per catch in his career. I mean, the average for running backs is like 7, and he's not even catching them at a very high rate. So that makes me feel like Hyde, if the team is at all rational, he'll be out there first and second down. DJ Dallas, they used him as the third down back last week when Homer was out. I'm expecting him to be the third down back. And then I expect Bo Scarborough to be last in the shuffle and maybe pick up some garbage time run. So what are you expecting out of the Seattle backfield here?
Yeah, I completely agree. I would say I'm maybe like a tiniest bit more confident that Carlos Hyde can pick up some targets simply because the last time we saw like a workhorse Carlos Hyde was the game I believe Chris Carson left, and he saw 4 targets to his backups 3. And we saw the same thing happen in San Francisco when he just plotted like an 80 target season, which he didn't do hardly anything with. But I think still we would project maybe 30 to 40% of the backfield targets to go to him and the rest to go to DJ Dallas. I would be shocked if we saw Bo Scarborough come out for a single third down or just like anything beyond 10, second, first and 10, anything beyond that. I'd be shocked if we saw him come out. So yeah, I still think maybe you could project 2 to 3 targets for Carlos Hyde because he'll be on the field a lot and he has a history of getting targets, not doing a ton with them. And even with Seattle, the one game he did see a decent amount of targets. But yeah, and I think it's simply put that like DJ Dallas at his price, like I don't care if he sees a handful of targets. That's a lot for his price, which is I believe $600. So I think most of the third downs will go to DJ Dallas with maybe Carlos Hyde getting 1 or 2 if, because I think it's just, I'd love to see DJ Dallas get the ball more, especially when we know how inefficient Carlos Hyde is, but it is difficult to assume the perfect rationality of coaches. So Carlos Hyde, almost all of the carries, probably a handful of targets, probably capping out at 3 or 4 maybe. DJ Dallas picking up the rest of the work, and I'd be surprised to see Bo Scarborough on the field, frankly, much at all.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, man, it's hard for me. Like DJ Dallas is a classic, like play that my gut's telling me no, but then the price tag is telling me yes, because like he barely played last week. I guess he played on 30. He ran routes on 32% of dropbacks, and he got 2 rushing attempts. So I mean, like he was very sparingly used last week when Alex Collins was the lead back. Now Carlos Hyde is the lead back. But man, it's hard to picture they won't use DJ Dallas in the passing game. So I feel like his role is a little bit more secure than last week would indicate. DJ Dallas has caught 86% of his passes this year so far. So that's been solid at least. But a drop or 2, maybe he gets yanked. So not a player you can have a ton of confidence in, but man, the guys you can get in your lineup when you have Dallas, that makes it worth it. And the thing is, one of my strategies is leaving money on the table, at least in the larger field tournaments. And you need guys that can put up at least 10 points. Otherwise, it's unlikely that you're going to have the optimal with money left on the table. I feel like Dallas could get there. He's more likely than any other punt play, certainly. So I think I'm begrudgingly over the field on Dallas. I feel he's the classic kind of like sharp play. So I expect a lot of guys who are using optimizers going to have a ton of Dallas. And then again, he's averaging 8 fantasy points per game this season, and he's 600. So I expect a lot of casual players to have Dallas too. I'll be interested to see how his ownership shakes out here. But we got a lot of great players on the Seahawks. Of course, their passing offense is one of the best in the league. And Lockett and Metcalf, although we can't predict which one of them will have a big week each week, usually one of them does pretty good. So what do you make of them tonight?
Yeah, I mean, I would be a fool to come in and say I had like a strong lead towards one or the other, because it is simply put that like DK Metcalf sees a slight fewer amount of targets on any given week, but has a higher ADOT. So his highs are probably going to be higher, and it's going to be difficult to predict when they come, but they're just both of them see so many targets and such a high target share that like both are great plays. I don't have a strong lean towards one. And these situations, I tend to lean to the opposite of what our ownership projections say. Like, so if for instance, we had DK Metcalf is the more popular player, I'd be going the other way, because I don't think I think anyone who tells you that they have a strong lean either way is either looking at like I think cornerback data is the perfect one that people always say like, oh, well, DK Metcalf gets the outside corner, Jalen Ramsey or, whomever. And sure, sometimes those hit, but I think the public just generally overweighs them. Or like, oh, DK Metcalf has 2 strong games in a row, he's going to have the recency bias. I would just lean the other way. So let's say like you wanted to play one of them in captain, perfectly viable to play them in captain. Right now, our captain ownership has a slight lean towards Tyler Lockett. Maybe I'd give the lean to DK Metcalf, but it's only a very slight lean. So I think, frankly, if I'm playing either of them, I'm just mixing them both in. I don't, they both see a lot of work, a slight, a decent lean in the air yards column towards DK Metcalf, but targets end up being more predictive fantasy points. And Tyler Lockett has the lean in target. So I think they're almost the same player in terms of how I project them.
Yeah, it's interesting because you mentioned how Lockett gets more targets and DK Metcalf has the longer ADOT. And I think that it creates a lot of variance with Metcalf compared to Lockett, but both of them have so much variance to begin with. But in Showdown, I feel like the variance almost doesn't matter. It's like, did they get in the winning lineup or not? And it's like, did they get 20 points or did they not? I guess DK Metcalf, maybe he'd be like more of a captain play relative to Lockett if you just compare their baselines, just because he has a lot more of his productions coming from the yardage and touchdowns and less from the PPR points. But I mean, maybe I'm just diving into the weeds here. It probably doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
David Moore, Greg Olsen, I think they're the other two guys maybe you can count on tonight for the Seahawks receivers. How are you feeling about David Moore? I see he's got a pretty nice price tag. I'm ending up with a decent amount.
Yeah, David Moore's kind of gotten priced up, but it's at the point, like, I don't really care what his price is as long as he's not at a stupid price range, because I'm just looking to mix in mid-range guys. Right now, he's the number 3 receiver on the team in terms of routes run. And Freddie Swain, I believe, is very similar. He's like within 30 or so routes run, but he just doesn't get targeted on his routes run. He has half, I believe it's almost exactly half the targets that David Moore does. So when David Moore is on the field and running routes, he actually gets targeted on them. So although like you might look at the routes run and see that they're splitting the number 3, and like the snap share might show that they're kind of splitting the number 3 receiver role, I think Freddie Swain is still just a number 4 at best receiver. David Moore is a guy who I think is even like an interesting leverage play if you wanted to run, say, like a heavy Arizona lineup and run back with someone. Obviously, you have to run it back with someone, but if you wanted to run it back, like he's not dead, like drawing dead to catch a touchdown. He's on the field a decent amount and running a decent amount of routes with Russell Wilson. I believe he has 3 touchdowns on the year, and that's kind of been his MO, is like spiky efficiency on certain weeks with Russell Wilson. And that's all you need to tell me, is the variance on a slate is so much that if this is the week he spikes in efficiency, he actually has a decent chance of making the optimal lineup. And his price is so that, like, no, he's not DJ Dallas at 600, but it still lets you get in the studs that you want to do. So David Moore is actually someone I am over the field on as of this point right now.
Nice, man. Yeah, I like him as a good guy that's going to be a little bit more under the radar tonight. I kind of a boom bust play, and he has a nice correlation with Russell Wilson, who obviously is going to be a staple of everyone's lineups tonight. All right, guys, we got a giveaway tonight. Check out the pin tweet on Awesemo_com on Twitter, and you can win a free year of Awesemo Plus NFL. It's like a $250 value, I believe. You just have to predict if Kyler Murray or Russell Wilson will throw more yards. One random user with the correct answer will get a free year of Awesemo Plus NFL. And we also, I mentioned the promo code Mayflower, $1 for NFL Express Weekly Pass. I mean, it's pretty much giving it away. So if you haven't checked it out, it has all of our Showdown content, the projections, ownership, the top Showdown plays, where I give them all my probabilities for players being the highest scoring or one of the top scoring in the flex. So one that I'll mention for the flex is, defense and kicker, because I heard Adam on the show before, like, express, a lot of reservation about going to defense and kicker. And I think the general feeling is like they're not very sexy plays in general, particularly defenses tonight where we're expecting such a shootout. And then kicker, they just they have a steady stream of about 6 to 12 fantasy points, I'd say, which can be enough to be one of the top 6 scoring players on the slate. So tonight, defense, they're so cheap. They're 3,200 on DraftKings for Cardinals, 2,800 for Seahawks. I have them as 6 and 5% chance of being one of the top 6 scoring players, so it's a long shot. But I'm kind of stacking some of my Millie Maker teams with the defenses, because one of my strategies is leaving money on the table, and you got to pick a bunch of value plays to do that. There aren't a lot of great ones, so I'm kind of adding up there. So how do you feel about the defense and kicker tonight?
So I believe Seattle is bottom 5 in field goals attempted, whereas on the other side, Arizona is top half of the league. It's like 14th, I believe. And I think that kind of comes as Cliff being a generally more conservative on fourth down kind of guy. Even when they get in the red zone, he's still willing to kick field goals. I'd lean Zane, although I don't have a strong preference either way. I will say in terms of the defenses, one that, like you said, they're both so cheap. And we've seen Russell Wilson, like, I agree. Russell Wilson has been playing incredible this year, but he's also right now setting a career high in interception rate. And just like he always has been, he does take sacks at a very high rate. Right now, he's taking sacks at like 8% of his dropbacks, essentially. It's not it's not insignificant that we could see a shootout where Russell Wilson drops back 40 plus times on his season long average of like an 8% sack rate. It's a little over 8% exactly. That's a lot of potential for sacks. And obviously we know sacks can turn into fumbles, touchdowns, or even just the pressure generated from not sacks, but just getting to the quarterback can help force interception. So I think I would be looking to the Cardinals defense as cheap, contrarian. Like, I don't think people are not going to want to play defenses here, but at their reduced prices, if the game just hits a modest under on the back of like a mediocre Russell Wilson performance, which like we've had a handful of Russell Wilson mediocre performances, it wouldn't be shocking to see that happen again. I think that would be well low owned relative to its odds of hitting. Whereas like I said, we've seen some pretty mediocre performances from Russell Wilson, namely last week, but even in the weeks before that, we've seen like, he didn't play well against Miami specifically too. So I think I prefer the Cardinals side just because I think it's crazy to say that in any game, Russell Wilson is a good matchup for a defense, which is obviously not true in the larger context of the NFL. But in the context of this game, we're not seeing Kyler Murray take sacks like he did last year, and he's not throwing interceptions at the rate that Russell Wilson is. So I lean towards the Cardinals defense, although I think, like you said, finding ways to leave money on the table as opposed to like, I don't know, playing Max Williams or whatever. I think I would rather just leave money on the table and hope that people try and spend all of their money. And that's how I get different, as opposed to making what I think are just like probably minus EV plays, like Max Williams drawing dead to get a catch in this game. I don't think you're drawing dead by playing a defense. You definitely have outs to your defense being successful. For me, it's the Cardinals, and in kickers, it's Zane Gonzalez, although I feel more confident in my Cardinals defense pick than I do in Zane Gonzalez.
Nice. I think people might underrate the defenses tonight. They're good values on a point per dollar basis, and although it's not the most safe bet tonight, they have upside. Now, one thing I've found is I thought defense a captain would be a good strategy, and I was like running that a good amount. But then on Monday night slate, I went back and I looked at all my lineups. The lineups where I had that contrarian captain, like the Bears defense, the rest of my lineup was pretty chalky and spent most of my money, and it's just duplicated way too many times. Like I had Bears defense captain lineups that had like 200 dupes in the Millie Maker. So it's like, if you think you might be getting sneaky with a lineup construction like that, well, you learned the lesson from me. What I was finding is the best strategy for avoiding the dupes is you pick one of the best players, and as I mentioned, leaving money on the table. So that's leading me to, I mean, there's so many good ones tonight, but like all the receivers, Hopkins, Lockett, and Metcalf, I think they're all solid. Carlos Hyde, I think that's a game script specific one that I like, and Drake as well for the same logic. Who are you landing on tonight?
Yeah, so I think in terms of like what I'm landing on versus the field, it's Carlos Hyde, simply because I'm modestly concerned with the fact that Alex Collins, like a street free agent, was able to come in and usurp DJ Dallas, a guy who they actually like drafted. He wasn't insignificant. He wasn't also a street free agent. They just chose that like, no, we're not going to play DJ Dallas. So I think because of that, we could actually see a lot, like we should project to see a lot of Carlos Hyde. And really the decision is like whether he gets in on some third downs or not, but he should see most of the between the tackles work in a game with a ton of points. So do I think he has the chance to steal a touchdown, if not 2 touchdowns from his teammates? Yeah, I do think that's a chance. So he's not going to be, I would imagine he's not very owned at captain. And I still think what you said is important too. No matter if you're getting chalky at captain or very weird at captain, you haven't just, especially like this mostly applies to the largest tournaments, you haven't just solved it. You haven't like, if I play Carlos Hyde at captain, I'm not like, well, I can play every other chalk play. I still have to get a little weird. And I think that weirdness comes from probably if I'm playing Carlos Hyde, not looking towards either of Tyler Lockett or DK Metcalf. So I think a build that I'm getting, maybe I'm getting a little cheeky with, I think I am at least, is playing some Carlos Hyde at captain well over the field at least. Maybe some like Russell Wilson, David Moore in that lineup where I think Russell Wilson can still get there and his receivers not get there. Although I think it is more just about like fading some of the top Seattle players in my lineups that I have Carlos Hyde. And then I kind of feel free to run it back with, your Kyler Murray's, DeAndre Hopkins. But of all the players at captain, I'm over the field on more so than any other one has been Carlos Hyde.
Nice. Yeah, Carlos Hyde, definitely a path to getting there if Seattle dominates this game. All right, we got a super chat from The Game is Rig. Thank you, The Game is Rig. He has his lineup here. Kyler Murray at MVP, Hopkins, Kirk, Fitz, and Moore. Who would you flip to over Murray, and who would you move, if any? So, like, the first thing I'm noticing here, he has Hopkins, Kirk, and Fitzgerald, all three Cardinals receivers. If you have all three, you need Murray in the MVP, I'd say. Yeah. It sounds like you agree with that. So
100%.
I think it's an interesting lineup, but it's hard to picture a game script where that's going to hit, because if Arizona puts up 3 passing TDs, like you need one to go to each of these guys basically, then Seattle's going to have to throw the ball a good amount. He has David Moore in the flex, which could get some of that correlation. But I mean, I think it's solid, but I kind of want to flip one of those Cardinals players for a Seahawk. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I kind of agree. I think it'd be weird to see, not impossible, certainly anything is possible on any given slate, but it would be weird to see Kyler Murray and this whole Cardinals offense perform so incredibly well that 3 of their receivers end up being in the optimal lineup. Kyler Murray at captain at MVP, obviously, and no one else from the other side. Like, it would have to be a massive blowout. And sure, that can happen, but I think I would rather bet on exactly what you said. I'd probably flip Fitzgerald because this is on FanDuel. FanDuel doesn't give you as many points for Fitzgerald's receptions, which is probably how he gets there. He doesn't have a deep enough ADOT to rack up a ton of yards probably. So he would be my preferred flip. I don't mind stacking up Cardinals. I would just say if you were to do that, maybe like flip one of the receivers for like Kenyon Drake or something as well. Otherwise, if you're not doing that, I would flip one of the receivers on the Arizona side to a Seattle player. I kind of agree. And it does depend a bit on what you're doing in terms of where this is getting entered. If this is getting entered in like the largest field contest, maybe you're not even looking to play Murray at MVP. If it's getting entered in a contest with 1,000 people, I think you make 2 maybe solid pivots off the optimal lineup, and you're probably at least drawing like live to maybe not solo chop, but get close to solo winning like 1,000-man tournament.
Nice. Thank you. The Game is Rig. Hopefully that helps. We also got a super chat from Ellingson. Thoughts on fading Murray and Wilson at captain, but locking both of them in the flex? So I think that if you want both of them in the same lineup, you almost kind of have to have them in the flex because of how expensive they are. So that makes sense to me. Would there be any reason why you would avoid Murray or Wilson at MVP?
I mean, I think maybe you could argue Russell Wilson, the way he's played has generally skewed towards one of his receivers having a massive game. I believe he is 5 of 9 on outscoring his receivers, which means that's 4 games that he hasn't outscored his receivers on just a raw points basis. That's not even like points per dollar basis. So if there were one, it would be him, simply because Kyler Murray is doing unprecedented things with his legs in terms of touchdowns, which, I mean, touchdowns are fluky, but he's also on pace for over 1,000 yards rushing. So it seems like Kyler Murray would be the one who is vastly more likely to get to the optimal captain without carrying one of his receivers there. So if I want to fade one, and if I am fading one, which I don't know if I'd say I'm fading him, but I'm just allocating more of my captain spots to Kyler Murray, I guess I'm below the field on Russell Wilson, because I think it's much more likely that a DK Metcalf or a Tyler Lockett goes and outscores him, because he just hasn't offered a ton with his legs.
Yeah, I think both are pretty solid at the captain. But Wilson getting more of his production from passing, I think you're right that if you had to pick one of them to put in the flex, one in captain, Kyler would be more likely to be captain. But then my simulation's telling me the opposite. So, I mean, they're basically tied in my simulation. Murray at 22% chance of being the top player and Russell at 24%. I mean, and sometimes the like median projection doesn't always tell the whole story here, because I'm pretty sure I have Russell Wilson at 26.4 and then Kyler Murray at 27.4. But the thing here is that I mean, there's so many correlations in NFL DFS. I can't even really explain it, like, to be honest. But I think it's really close. All right, we had another question in chat. Nick says, "Who's your favorite large field GPP captain?" So I'm really torn tonight. I have like exposure to all 6 of the top players basically, and it's pretty evenly spread out. So Murray, Wilson, Metcalf, Lockett, and then my cash quarterback is DJ Dallas, just so I can fit in all the studs in the flex. Who are you leaning towards at captain?
I think the question is most like contrarian large field. Mine would be Carlos Hyde. I think in the Millie Maker, like I don't know, maybe how do you feel about playing either defense at captain, which I know you talked about at the beginning. Are you going back to that again this week? I think if you were playing the Millie Maker, you could viably put, for me, it was Cardinals. I could see arguments for both sides. That would be the largest of the largest field, most contrarian playing for me, Cardinals defense. I think in the fields I'm playing at, which is not the Millie Maker, it's a little smaller. Carlos Hyde, for me, I just think has the ability to probably has the ability to score 2 touchdowns. And I think few players likely have as good of touchdown equity as he does, especially at his price, which lets you play a lot of the other good plays. Although I do think if you play Carlos Hyde in the Millie Maker at captain, you still have to think about how much salary am I leaving on the table, because he lets you play all the good plays, but all of the other Carlos Hyde captain lineups are also going to be playing all the other good plays. So maybe you still play Carlos Hyde and leave salary on the table and fade some of the other good plays. I guess this is a long way of saying Carlos Hyde.
Nice. I like it. Well, one way maybe you could build that lineup is you put Jason Myers and the Seahawks D in or something like that. Yeah. Those are 2 guys that won't be popular. Jason Myers, although Seattle's red zone offense has converted at a really high rate, he actually has a higher field goal prop tonight. Not that sportsbook bets are gospel, but maybe, I mean, my general feeling is that Seattle's gotten lucky in the red zone, and maybe they'll need to kick some more field goals tonight than average, but I know you guys hate it when I talk about kickers, so I'll move on. Thank you, Eric, for the super chat. He says, cash game on FanDuel, Murray at MVP, Kirk, Moore, Wilson, Hyde. Okay, so I think the question is just, is that a solid strategy? And I mean, he's got Wilson and Murray. I'd say those are the 2 cash locks on FanDuel. Besides that, I think just filling out your lineup with solid picks is pretty good. So I think Moore might be the pivot point, Kirk and Hyde being a little bit more reliable. What do you think of that lineup?
Can you read me the lineup one more time?
Murray MVP, Kirk, MVP. Moore, Wilson, Hyde.
Yeah, I think that all makes sense to me. I think I've talked about Hyde being undervalued, so I think that makes sense. Both quarterbacks, like you said, it's kind of just mandatory getting in both quarterbacks. So yeah, I think that all makes sense to me.
Nice. All right. So one thing we want to talk about is single entry and 3 max contests. So to me, this is a lot about game script. What kind of game script we want to target, because we want to play all these correlations in the showdown slates. So what would be one kind of way you'd approach this slate, starting with like maybe a captain, and then who would be in the rest of your lineup?
So let's go with like a large 3 max tournament, one of the larger ones they have on DraftKings. Let's start off with Carlos Hyde. I've talked about him all night. I will have some 3 max entries with Carlos Hyde in them, because even when you look at like like 10, 15, 20,000 entries, you are still trying to get different and trying to build unique lineups. Is it as much of a priority as the Millie Maker? No, but you still don't want to end up having the chalkiest lineup of the slate. So I will say Carlos Hyde. No, let's go weird. Carlos Hyde and like a Jason Myers. On the other side, I think at that point, you're probably safe to throw in like the Kyler Murray, DeAndre Hopkins stack. And this, I guess, assumes that we just have like a Seattle probably gets a lot of points on the board on the back of field goals and Carlos Hyde. So I think we've got, 4 players right there. I'd have to look at what salary we have left. Maybe you could throw like a PPR option like a Fitzgerald or maybe even an Edmonds more specifically in there.
Yeah, I like that. I think Edmonds, he fits that nicely, being the guy that you'd expect to be on the field more often trailing than when they're ahead. So that correlation I like. And then the correlation of if Seattle's running the ball a lot, then Arizona is going to pass more than run. That makes a lot of sense. So I like that strategy. I'll just one thing okay, so I'll start off with a quarterback at captain, Russell Wilson.
Sure.
So if you pick Russell Wilson at captain, I think you definitely want at least 2 receivers because you don't want that production to be concentrated. I do have some lineups where I have Metcalf and Lockett. I mean, maybe that would be very likely to be duped. So that is a smaller field strategy. But I think if it's a larger field, maybe you get Greg Olsen and Lockett, or Greg Olsen, Metcalf, or if more and Greg Olsen, then you have to start to a pretty solid lineup. Or DJ Dallas being their third down back could be a good pairing with Wilson that doesn't break the bank. And then maybe you run it back, let's see, with Kyler Murray, I guess. He's pretty much a plug and play in any lineup, I would say. So let's do one more here. So you did a Seattle kind of domination. Let's start. Who do we want in like an Arizona dominating game?
I mean, I think maybe the only contrarian way to go with that would be a Kenyon Drake, which like we know he has 100-yard and multi-touchdown upside. I guess in terms of let's go with like a smaller single field or a single entry contest, I would still look to a Kyler Murray, DeAndre Hopkins stack. I think if you're looking at like an actual domination, you could go with like Kyler Murray, DeAndre Hopkins, Kenyon Drake. That'd be interesting. I don't think people sure, I would argue that there's a modest amount of negative correlation between Kenyon Drake and like the passing attack simply because he is not involved in the passing attack. And you would think if they're massive favorites, that would be good for Drake. Maybe less good for the passing attack because they aren't throwing much. Be an interesting way to stack just to get a bit unique, though. On the other side, I do like, you mentioned it, I like Greg Olsen almost regardless of game script because he's cheap and he sees a lot of red zone work. Even if the Seattle offense doesn't really hit, right now he has, I believe, 9 red zone targets on the season. That is tied with Metcalf, 1 behind Lockett. They've kind of spread out the red zone work. And although you would think the 2 top options there, Lockett and Metcalf, would get all of it and the rest would be left for scraps, Greg Olsen has been heavily involved in the red zone. And outside of 2 weeks ago, when I think it was Hollister that got like 7 targets, they really haven't used a ton of their backup tight ends. Like you said, beginning of the show, I believe it's not been a ton of Disley or Hollister. So I think maybe Greg Olsen would be an interesting run back because it really takes 1 touchdown to Olsen, regardless of if the Seattle offense does well or not. If he catches their 1 of 2 touchdowns, that's all he needs at his price.
Nice. So, we got a question in chat here from People's Championship Wrestling. If I'm playing predominantly Seahawks players and no Kyler, would I want to play DK or Hopkins? So that's interesting. I think, well, he said he has Lockett and Moore already. So do you want to like triple stack and get 3 pass catchers or go with the other side? I'd say maybe Hopkins because there's only so many passing attempts to go around and having a good share of both sides makes sense to me. What do you think?
Yeah, that's kind of what I thought too, that it would just take an insane amount of volume from the Seattle side to see all of the guys go off, to have all of the guys hit. Whereas I think it's more likely that one of the guys has a very good game and the other one can still have a fine game, but at their prices. You have to think about when you're paying so much for these guys, at their prices, what are the odds that they all pay off? doesn't seem very likely. I think the odds are more in favor of Hopkins plus, a Russell Wilson, Tyler Lockett stack paying off. So I would lean towards, if you're playing already Russell Wilson and one of the receivers, I don't think it's impossible that, two of the receivers and Russell Wilson goes off, but I think it's more likely that DeAndre Hopkins plus, the expensive quarterback receiver stack hits.
And I see some people in chat saying bad things about Greg Olsen. Respect your elders, fellas. All right. We got 7 minutes left. Got a lot of questions in chat here. Metcalf and Isabella, or Lockett and Olsen. I mean, I guess I go with Lockett and Olsen just because I feel really confident, or I don't feel confident that Isabella will get that deep pass that everyone is hoping for. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it maybe was the Cowboys game where he came out, got this deep bomb on the first play, doesn't connect. On the same drive, gets another deep bomb, doesn't connect again, and they won that game, and it never happened. And that seems like a very plausible outcome where he gets 1 to 2 deep targets, and those are such volatile targets that if they don't hit, you are live to get 0 points from him. So I agree. I will go with the Greg Olsen. Was it Greg Olsen, Tyler Lockett, I believe? I would go with that, but obviously I would caution you that let's say this lineup for some reason didn't have Russell Wilson. If I tell you to play Greg Olsen and Tyler Lockett, you should probably be playing Russell Wilson.
So one tool you can use to help with this decision is on my top Showdown plays tool. I have the chance that each player will be one of the 6 highest scorers. And I have Isabella for 5.8%. and Olsen for 7.5%. So, I mean, neither one is, a great play, but Olsen, he gets more of that PPR score just being on the field more. So that's how I'm leaning here. Alex is asking me again who my favorite captain is in large field tournaments. This one, I kind of, I didn't answer the question. So guys are getting on me here. But I'm looking at my top lineups, and there's no one guy I have a lot. I guess Lockett seems to be in a lot of lineups. So Metcalf, Lockett, Hopkins, maybe my 3 favorites. But I'm not telling you guys anything that you couldn't already know, that those guys are good captain picks here. All right, got a super chat from iCody Fire. Thank you, iCody Fire. Captain Dallas, Kyler, Hopkins, Myers, Russ, and Lockett for cash. For cash, I think that makes a lot of sense because you got 4 studs in there, and Dallas he makes it all work. I actually think that might be my cash lineup player for player. Well, did you build any cash lines today?
Yeah, I believe that was the cash lineup I had as well. I'm trying to think if there's anything I made the cash lineup earlier because I didn't expect any weird inactives to come through. Don't have a ton of money out on cash tonight, but I do have a little bit. And I think that's it. Yeah, obviously I'm trying to check all the boxes. Obviously both quarterbacks, Dallas makes everything work. I think that's it.
Yeah. I think Dallas doesn't even need to do that well for you to cash because it's so hard to get those 4 guys in the same lineup that if 3 out of 4 do well, there might not be that many lineups that don't have Dallas at captain that have those 3. So pretty good odds there. And Dallas is a great point per dollar play. Although I feel a gut feeling that I'm uncomfortable with, but it's DFS, we got to ignore those feelings. Dashing Door says Swain, baby. I think you're saying maybe Swain is a deep flyer. Would you put that in Millie?
Yeah, sure. He's in the player pool for the Millie. I wouldn't take him out of the player pool if I were playing the Millie, but basically he just plays a lesser of the number 3 receiver role, and he doesn't get targeted when he plays that number 3 receiver role, where actually David Moore does get targeted on within I think 30 or so routes on the season. So he's live to catch a few passes. Certainly he could catch a touchdown, but I do think outside of the largest tournaments on DraftKings, I don't really think I'd even consider him.
All right, we got an interesting one here in chat. Steve asks Isabella or Arnold in the flex. I mean, Isabella is so much more of an exciting player than Arnold that it's hard to not say Isabella. What do you think?
Yeah, I would still go Isabella because I think they're probably projecting for a similar amount of targets. And I mean, sure, I guess like Dan Arnold's more likely to catch his targets because they're lower ADOT, but just in terms of the actual yards you project him to catch on a per target basis, you'd obviously project Isabella for more. So like maybe if you were arguing like which one of these has a higher floor, I'd say Dan Arnold, but like he's not in play for cash, so why would I care about floor anyways? So I'm still going Isabella here.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, as far as good plays, I'd say Isabella is so much better than Arnold. I have him as twice as likely to be in the top 6 scorers. But I mean, Arnold, it's hard to imagine he's going to be popular. So I don't hate Arnold. It's just Isabella, a little bit more exciting. Eric says, Will Disley captain? I'm out on the cheap captains, at least in the large field, because you just get duped a million times. Like this lineup that we were just talking about with Dallas at captain. It's like if you put Dallas at captain, you got 49,000 for 5 players. You're basically getting 4 of the best 5. So Saj says Dallas going to be a huge bust, going to kill a lot of lineups. I think we're rooting for something else to happen there. I just hope he gets a decent enough score that doesn't swing the results of the night too far in one direction. We got 1 minute to lock, so get those final lineups in. Any final thoughts about tonight's game?
No, I think we're in agreement that we are hoping for, and I could certainly see Dallas come out and not playing at all. But I think we're hoping for some Dallas. Hoping for maybe some of these pass catchers to go. Because as you said, it's difficult to like pick out like who the good players are at captain. So maybe let's hope that it's a lot of the mid-range score as well. Because specifically, I think both you and I are leaving salary on the table, regardless of even that like the highest stakes. I think or the highest like entries. You're just leaving more salary on the table. Even in my like few thousand people like single entry 3 max stuff, I'm still thinking I'm going to play as many of the best plays I can, and then instead of playing the final best play, it's going to leave salary on the table in the hope that some mediocre play outscores a better play, because that is certainly live in any game. So let's hope the mid plays go off, because that's kind of what we need for the like $47,000 lineups to make the optimal lineup.
Yeah, like maybe we get a kicker or defense and the captain. I wouldn't mind that at all. Hopefully some Seattle running backs, because those are the great values tonight. And if you guys have some success tonight, make sure to hit us up on Twitter and Slack. Let everyone know, that what we're all trying to do is possible. And I think people are inspired by that, because these tournaments can get pretty big and the odds of winning aren't always that high. So we're all chasing that glory. Thank you to No House Advantage. If you enjoy prop betting and DFS, it combines both. So make sure to check that out, promo code Awesemo. And we're giving a $1 Express NFL pass with the promo code Mayflower. So if you haven't checked it out yet, make sure to, so you can get all these tools that we're referencing. Has all the Showdown content. Guys, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, last plug, sub. We're going to be back tomorrow morning with the NFL Strategy Show. Good luck tonight.